Hello, everyone, and welcome to Exoconscious Humans YouTube. Please like and subscribe to our channel and to promote the visibility and voice of Exoconscious Humans. I'm Rebecca Hardcastle-Wright, and today our guest is my good friend Lee Gerdes. Lee is a software engineer with a background in math, physics, and psychology, who's contributed to over 24 peer-reviewed publications and is the author of the book Limitless You, The Infinite Possibilities of a Balanced Brain, which I read when it first came out. Thank you for that book. As the founder of Brain State Technologies, now called Cereset in Scottsdale, Arizona, Lee brought an engineering perspective to balancing and aligning the brain. His inspiration was to deal with our brain damage trauma, seeing that our brain needed a mirror to see itself, which he used sound to accomplish that. So your brain looking at your brain. Cereset's program does not train the brain, but rather is driven by the brain itself to heal itself. So just for transparency, I met Lee 16 years ago and participated in his program and have been grateful ever since. So Lee, welcome to Exoconscious Humans YouTube.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to come on. And let's just start by giving people an overview, because your brain state invention, your Cereset invention, is so unique. Could you give us just an overview of what is Cereset? How does it work? Just the kind of the basics, nuts and bolts of it.
Let me start with the understanding that I had as I founded Cereset, and that I still have even more strongly now. And that understanding is, first and foremost, that we are created in the image of God. And because of that creation state of each of us, totally unique, by the way, fingerprints of hundreds of millions never matched, totally unique, but still us as unique as such, we still share something. And that something is, of course, sometimes very obvious, but sometimes very subtle. For instance, if you were standing in a line, let's say in the airport waiting to get up to a counter, and then you feel you think about something, somebody's looking at you, and then you turn around and there's somebody 20 feet away looking at you. Yeah, that's subtle energy. So because I wasn't able to help to be healed by anything from the outside, I went back to my core belief system, and then from that decided I would try to use subtle energy to help the brain to see itself so it could make changes. And my work in doing that was to think about a sort of a teeter-totter with a fulcrum in the middle. And then I had looked at my brain a number of times and saw that it was like this, very high on one side and low in some areas on the other side. And so my point was, I wasn't going to try to change that. Instead, I was going to try to support this poor little fulcrum that couldn't be a fulcrum anymore. In other words, I was trying to make that larger, stronger, so that the brain could, in fact, correct itself. And so my point was then to try something to resonate with that middle range. Now, it's resonance, it's not changing it. It has nothing at all in the world to do with frequency. Nothing. Doesn't matter. I'm Switzerland when it comes to frequency. Don't care. On the one hand. On the other hand, we use engineered tones. We have to engineer those tones because each tone in a frequency spectrum or a note scale, the higher the tone, the more the energy moves this way. So when it moves very, very high from a soprano in my old TV days, I say that 50 years ago, but the soprano was singing and busted the wine glass because the frequencies were very high and bounced off of it. Now, today we might have frequencies that are very low from the car next door because they're listening to rap music, if you want to call that music. But anyway, they're listening to some very low tones, and that goes through their window and through our window and into our ear. Why? Because high tones, high frequencies move this way, and they're relatively short. Low tones move this way, and they're relatively long. They have a tail. And so they don't bounce off. Well, what we had to do was engineer every single one of those tones so that the tone would be equal to what the brain was receiving. So we use engineered tones in a scale but it's not a frequency, it's not a frequency scale, it's not music. They're engineered tones where all the tones sound sort of like music, but they're not. And the only reason we use them is because we use them to reflect that dominant frequency in the brain to see if it can see itself and then start saying, oh, 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 and then reset itself. And sure enough, 170,000 clients later, 60 offices in the United States and 12 outside and 15 clinical trials. Guess what? It worked.
That's a wonderful description. Thank you. And our community is full of contactees and people that have had, I guess you would call maybe you could religious way say divine experiences or extraterrestrial or angelic experiences that have influenced their life, and they've taken that experience, Jesus, Buddha, could be spiritual, and integrated that into who they are. And they're very aware that there's the field that they're working with that's them, and yet bigger than them, could call it higher power kind of situation. Could you share? So one of the things that impressed me about you was that you were sharing so openly about what happened to you in California that really kind of jump-started this entire journey of yours.
I was in California, and one of my degrees was in theology too. So I was working with a church, and we were working to serve a meal. We called it a friendship banquet, and back then it was the early '90s. The church was close to what's called the Tenderloin, and in that area there were many people with AIDS that were dying, and so we were trying to be people of the way, followers, which meant we acted our faith in loving one another, regardless of how we saw them or not. We loved them anyway. And in doing that, we put on a friendship banquet. So we hosted them in a way that had white tablecloths and crystal, and the whole thing, all right? 4-course meals. And the only thing we asked them, and they had to, A, make a reservation, couldn't show up and knock the door and expect to come. A, they had to make a reservation. And B, we asked them to dress according to the grace and love that we were showing them. It worked so well. It was incredible. The first couple of times it was a little rocky, but after that, I was locking a gate after one of those programs, and I was approached from behind by 4 youth, one with a baseball bat, and assaulted. And in that assault, I received a mild traumatic brain injury, and I couldn't get help with it. And so I barely could sleep for the next 8 years. I would have invading thoughts. I would have moments of what I call short circuit, where I would be doing this and this and this. And what am I doing? Just my brain would stop, sort of click. And it was very uncomfortable. It made me very uncomfortable. And I didn't like to go out very much. And when I could only go to a couple of restaurants because they knew me and they knew I tipped really well because of this. But I would do that, and then I would get a chair in the corner. My life was compromised, and I could not come out of it. Anything I tried, everything I tried, counseling and spiritual work and psychiatry and neurology and internal medicine, and I tried a medicine doctor. I wasn't going to go any. I couldn't, and I was getting worse, and so I didn't think it was worth my life anymore, and just wanted to look at my brain to see what happened, because I had started to read about it and wondered, why hadn't anybody really looked at the energy of my brain? That's what's hurt. Everything in my life changed that quickly. How I thought, what I believed, everything changed. And so I wasn't happy with me. I wasn't happy with the values I had. I wasn't happy. I didn't know what it was to be that way. And I was getting further and further away from it, not closer. So after I kind of had a dream, actually, that I might be able to see it. And so I started looking at my brain. I got some equipment. I hacked together some software. I had 10 sensors and paste in my hair and all over, whatever. But I did it about the same time every day, and I started looking at my brain and found out it was highly asymmetrical. It was very different between the hemispheres. And from what I read, when that happens, there's a, quote unquote, brain injury or problem, and therefore consciousness being kind of the state or quality of awareness we have of not only what's internal existence, but what's external existence. And I didn't have much of it. I didn't have much consciousness. And so I worked on that, and then sort of had another inspiration, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, that if I could only show my brain what it was doing, and surgery wasn't an option. I just had old handsaw. That wouldn't have worked, So, but I knew this. We were created in the image of God. Doesn't mean we're created infinitely, but we're created in the image of an infinite God, which kept haunting me because I was having trouble even believing in God, frankly, at that point. But I stuck with it, and I started putting together the software to think, well, I'll just show my brain the middle range. I won't show it the high or the low. I won't show it the left or the right. I'll just show it sort of what's in the middle here. And I mean, it was rudimentary. It took 70 sessions, but I started to sleep. And then I thought, wow, this is cool. And then I thought, nah, this isn't cool. I didn't do anything. It was just my time, right? I mean, I've been 8 years in purgatory or hell, and what the heck? It's time to get the heck out of here, right? So maybe I'm coming back. And then I said, I was talking to my kids and I said, but, it didn't really change me any really. And they went, oh, Dad. I said, Dad, we could not really stand you. When you would visit, when they were in college, when you would visit, we would meet you together, and then one of us would say, well, we got to go do something, but we'll be back in an hour or two. And then we'd come back, and then the others say, oh, I got to go do something. And then, I say, I guess you did, didn't you? I didn't even have the consciousness to know that at the time. Yeah. And now we were having fun and laughing and whatever. So that's, and so then I thought, well, if it's real, maybe I could help some other people. And then I kind of worked with some other people, and here I am.
You had kind of developed this collaboration with David Vercelli, Dr. Scare, Bill Tiller, and there was kind of this consciousness community, this brain community that you were developing that was so, I just felt so fortunate when you would invite me to attend your meetings. And could you talk a little bit about how your view of trauma has changed?
At the time, and still today, let's take military, for example. They thought about trauma, and still do today, especially PTSD, in terms of fight or flight. So the brain had flipped into a fight or flight state, and that's where everybody was. And so, the people that I worked with were either subtle energy people, Bill Tiller, and therefore I could learn a lot with him about applying like fast Fourier transforms and other things for wave understanding the human energy. I could break that down in physics in that way, digital signal processing. And so, and the other people I kind of really left behind because they were in a world of consciousness where my world was not there. So I just left. And, but what I did do all the time was keep data, because I'm a data guy. When Amazon started, you know how Amazon started? They started as a bookseller.
Bookstore.
And you know how they started as a bookseller? Some crazy people from Minnesota came in and said, hey, we got an algorithm and we can help you sell books. How do you do that? Well, we can refer your buyers for other books that they like. How do you do that? We're not telling you, but we'll show you. Okay. So boom, they were our first customer and exploded. And so I was always a data guy and still am, and so that was the basis because I like to measure stuff, right? And because that helps my consciousness. And then I go from what I see and know and let myself think about, I wonder what the genesis of that is. And then that helps my consciousness for not the internal reality, but the external. And that's how I walk life. Makes me kind of crazy, but that's okay. Nothing wrong with crazy as long as you're good.
So for years, I've looked at, and when I lived in Washington, D.C., we were in touch when I lived in Washington, D.C., because you were doing military, I think, at that point. But I was very interested about the Bush Brain Initiative and then the Obama Brain Initiative. And I wondered how those big science programs, the Genome Project, but mostly the brain projects that were going on, identifying different parts of the brain. Did that at all influence your work, or was the military using that?
Yes, it did. But the difference was perspective. I'm thinking about it from the terms of capturing subtle energy, and they're thinking about it in terms of intervention. Intervene on a near infinite system, which is this 3-pound mass between our ears. I don't want to intervene on that. I'm not smart enough to do that. And so, to give you some idea, science has had great intention that was very bad. For instance, many years ago, the idea of stem cells came out to help these children who were had a high complex and hormone problem, and those stem cells were made from the brains of cadavers. Well, now they know that those children that received those stem cells, yes, it helped their hormones, but a high percentage of them have Alzheimer's.
Wow.
Because Alzheimer's, in terms of cellular transfer, can be caught. So it does have somewhat of a genetic component. So things like that, many things like that have happened. And at this point in my life, I'm just leery of some of those things. I'm not saying they're bad per se. I just don't believe humans have the paradigm wide enough to see beyond this, and it can cause them to intend one thing but affect another. So anytime I think I know something absolutely, I'm pretty sure I don't know it. And that's the way I work, So I keep kind of refreshing myself and recognizing my ignorance. And that's helpful too in terms of ego. Let you have a healthy ego on the one hand, but humbles you like the devil on the other hand. I love that. But so that's how we work with people. We place sensors on their scalp. We let those sensors read the brain. It goes into a computer. The computer then takes that middle range and starts finding the dominant frequency in it, and then plays a tone, because we have associated tones to each frequency in that middle range. And we've done it by engineering those tones so that we had to engineer. We went to Nashville and we recorded piano, scales, and we recorded Celeste and acoustic strings and voice. And then for each of those, we had to change and make the different lengths of the sound envelope to be about the same, so they wouldn't have more influence. One wouldn't have too much more influence than the other in the brain. And it's worked.
When I came into brain states, I knew something was wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was. It was the invisible wound, I like to call it. And trauma is an invisible wound, and other people can't see it. And honestly, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see my own wound. And I thought it was fascinating because so I went through one session, and then you called me up and you said, Rebecca, how are you doing? And I said, I'm not doing well. And you said, no, you need to come back. And so when I came back, I got another evaluation. They reevaluated me, and the guy's going out the door. I said, oh, by the way, would you tell me what I was registering at when I came? He goes, well, I'm not really supposed to do that. And I said, well, I won't tell Lee, but just tell me. I just kind of curious. So bless his heart, he came back He goes, well, when you first came, you were an 8. And we usually tell people to go right to their doctor when you're an 8. But he goes, you're about, I don't know, 48, 40, 50 right now. So he goes, by the time we get done, you're going to be much better. And all of a sudden, I just had this awareness that had I not met you, had I not connected with you, that I knew in my heart, I knew something was wrong with me and I was going to get sick. I knew that intuitively.
Yeah.
And then your work validated that. So what kind of illnesses were you seeing as a result of trauma? Because it's not just a brain injury, it affects your whole body.
That's because your brain drives your whole body. It drives every single cell in your body. So we're just learning about that. And getting back to COVID, that's how we found out, once we learned about that we needed to work on the left frontal quadrant of the brain more and the right rear quadrant. Later, CTs and MRIs confirmed that COVID caused 7 to 10 years of aging, and the brain shrunk. The cerebral cortex itself lost density. It shrunk because of that. And what happens was, now they know this, that it wasn't the cellular process that got messed up. It was the connections between the cells that were inflamed. COVID was an inflammation of the brain. And that's why inflammations are so distraught for us, because we can feel the pain, but it moves. So it could be in our hip, or especially if it's in our back, lower back, or a hip or a leg, whatever. So the understanding that sometimes when you then start getting these areas to talk more, they rectify the situation themselves. Because now, when one is over here and another one's up here, the connection here is not this way, it's this way. And it's stretched, so it's inflamed. And so when this comes back, now it's shortened, and it has a chance for blood flow, it has a chance for the body to heal itself. And that's what we do with COVID, and that's what we've done with hundreds of long COVID clients. For 40, 50 kinds of pathologies. We had a pathology in a guy. Can I tell the story? Go ahead. I will. I won't use his name, but he had lost feeling after COVID in his groin area, inside of his body, not outside. And then that feeling, so he couldn't feel himself urinate. And then that feeling went outside. So then that loss of feeling started moving up to his stomach and then to his chest. And he had gone to Cleveland Clinic for 18 months. He had 48 doctors at Cleveland Clinic. His last ditch effort to get help was to come to Cereset in Scottsdale, and he did. And so I worked with him kind of as a special client, because I said, I've never even heard of such a thing, let alone know how to fix it. So don't. But what I might be able to help you do, is quote unquote, have your own consciousness of it. In other words, help your brain to reset itself so it can relax and you can heal it from inside out instead of outside in. And sure enough, we saw, I came out looking after we collected initial data, he was in the waiting room waiting for us, and I came out laughing and smiling. And he said, "Oh, I'm glad you're laughing and smiling. I think I'm dying." And I said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disrespect you, really. But I'm laughing and smiling because I saw an 800% differentiation between left and right and a set of corresponding lobes, and that might be our answer. 1 week later, that was the answer.
A week?
Yep. So he told me when he came in, because I often ask people and I don't work with clients that much really anymore, but our techs will ask people, what could we help you with the most? And he told me, my 7-year-old and my 5-year-old come up to me and try to hug me. And then they said, "Did you feel that, Daddy?" And I said, "Yes." But he said, "I don't feel anything. I'm just numb. I don't feel it physically and I don't feel it emotionally. I'm just numb." And I said, numb is a state. We'll take numb and start from there. So that's what we did. When he emailed me on Monday after he got back to Ohio, I think where he was, he said that he had felt her hug when he came home. And he told me I would never know what happened, that his life changed so radically after 2 years. And he's right, I'll never know.
No.
But I do know that those hugs were real. They were real before, but he didn't know because he couldn't feel it. He had to lie to her. It wasn't because he wanted to, because he had to. So I had instances like that, and I just didn't know for those 8 years. So what I try to do now is free people's brain to help them reset themselves so that they can know. Now, sometimes that involves physical ailment. It often does.
Mhm.
And many times it might involve a lower threshold or capability of immune system activity or an overactivity too, an autoimmune disease. But whatever it is, they have some physical or ailments. But so many people have come to me after and said, "Lee, you didn't tell me this was going to be a spiritual experience." I said, "It was your spiritual experience, not mine. And your brain was now able to see because it had eyes, and hear because it had ears of faith. You were able and are able to see beyond. Go therefore and be all you can be."
Where does the soul and the spirit reside in humans? Is it in our brain? Is it a field outside of our body? I mean, where's memory? Because we still haven't located memory necessarily. We're still working on that, it seems. And yet to have the protocols and go through the program, there has to be some memory there to have some sustainability and integration to make it work. And it seems like soul and spirit and memory are all wound up in humans in some way, and you've tapped into a part of it.
On the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is a picture of the creation account. And there's this cloud-like affair, and there's this creator reaching out from this cloud and touching his creation, touching this creation. And this creator, that cloud, if you look carefully, is a brain. You can see the frontal lobes, you can see the brainstem, you can see the temporal lobes, you can see it's perfectly a brain. Because Michelangelo, that's how he became Michelangelo as an artist, right? He would use cadavers, and then the church didn't like that, of course, but that's what he did. And that's how he at the time was inspired to paint that creation account. Of course, the church didn't know, or they'd never have it on the Sistine Chapel at the time, right? So it shows us that we are unique and hugely important to our Creator. So important that Creator works with us and for us in spite of ourselves sometimes, and in spite of what others may think. The operational paradigm limits of their understanding might be a lot bigger than that. So when you ask, where is that soul? I would say it's in reality. It's that incredible capability of being quiet and listening to what's beyond us. And it's that incredible fun of taking that and exercising it in the world. That's just a huge amount of fun.